We start out looking at this value scale right here. Let me move that over a bit. And it's numbered 1 through 11, so it takes you from white to black, and then all these stages in between. So you could basically say this is 10% white, 20%, or excuse me, 10% black, 20% black, 30% black, etc. And so that's what we really want to shoot for on our painting. This is a good example of some student work that was done in previous years. Just disregard the brown scale right now. But that Grisaille scale shows a nice progression from light to dark, and very neatly done too. So I want to show you, take you through the process here. Pretty simple, but there are a few tips that you might want to pay attention to. So to begin with, we're only using black and white paint on this one. And this is a good simple introduction to using oil paint and finding out how it behaves and how to blend and mix. So the other thing we need is a palette knife, which you should have in your kit. So this is your palette knife. And we want to start out on this far end of the scale with white. So we want to do pure white. It will look different than the raw canvas. And so when you have a painting with white as part of the image, you do want to paint it and not just leave the raw canvas showing. So we'll start out, here's our brush. This is kind of an older beat up brush, just like one that you have in your kits there, this small flat brush. And I'm using an older one just to demonstrate that it's possible to get some very precise painting work done with this, these older kind of fuzzy beat up brushes. So I'm going to paint this white in first, just as a good reference. And it's a little bit hard to see on this one, so I'm going to do this quickly. And our next shade will be a little easier to see. But notice as I'm working on these edges, I'm painting right up to the edge from the inside of the edge. And this can give you a very nice, clear, sharp line. Even with a large flat brush, you can get a very sharp, clear, straight line. So because of my position, I'm going to paint along this edge. But I find it just as successful, or maybe even easier, to paint along the inside edge with the end of the brush and then pull back this way. I hope you can see that. So our next square we want to fill with basically a 10% gray. And we want to start with white because it's much easier to change white by adding a little black than it is to go the other direction. If you started with pure black and then tried to change it to a light gray or white at the end, you would have to add a lot of white to it to get that to happen. So we want to use our palette knife to mix and blend first. And it's a good habit to get in to use the palette knife because it does save wear and tear on your brushes. So start out with a good bit of white, and then just a touch of the black, very, very small amount of the black. And then you can use this palette knife to mix that together and blend and see what it looks like. So this is a very, very light gray, probably too light. I'm going to hold it up over here just to compare it to the white of the background. So it's still a little too light. We want to push it a little farther, but it's better to start out with too little black than to add too much, because then you have to go back then and add more white and things like that. So we're approaching a good 10% black. And 10% I just mean visually, not by volume. So let's call that a good 10%. So still a very light gray, but beginning to move toward a darker tone. So we're going to pick up some of that with the brush. And this is called loading your brush. You want to pick up a moderate amount of paint so it's loaded fully, but not very clumped up or covered with lots of paint, because if you have too much paint, it's harder to control. So again, I'm going to go right up to the edge with this brush, and painting along the edge with the end of this flat brush can give you a very precise straight edge. And the goal is, with the paint deposit, to cover that canvas texture entirely, but without visible brush strokes. So you want it to be a thin, even coat of paint, so that you see the color and not the brush strokes. And again, I really recommend painting up to the edge with the end of this flat brush and getting a nice, even coat of gray in there. Now, to get a neat edge, sometimes it might be to your advantage to turn your work around so that you can get a more comfortable position in approaching that edge, and paint from the inside of the edge and pull back this way, so you can get a nice controlled paint deposit. And it's all about control. We want to control not only the value, but the paint deposit and those edges. We want to make nice, clean, sharp edges. One reason I recommend working from the inside of the edge is that if you work from the outside this way, it's harder to get a clear edge. You can, if you paint up to it like this, you're more likely to get blurring and smudging and things like that. So come at that edge from the inside and you can get a very sharp, precise edge. And so that's one of our goals. We want good value, good paint deposit, and sharp, clear edges. So I'm just going to do one more to try to mix a 20% black. And as you go, you'll need to add more and more black to get it to change. But it's much better than trying to use black and change that into a lighter gray. That requires lots of paint. And I'm not going to be as precise on this because I'm going faster than you need to go. Work at a pace where you can do your best job. This may be yet a bit dark. I'm going to lighten it up just a bit. We want it to be 20%, not too close to a dark gray. So that looks decent for our purposes. And between colors, I'm going to try to unload a little paint off my brush here. The best thing is to wipe this on a clean cloth, a painting cloth. So you should have a painting cloth with you as part of your setup. An old t-shirt works really well. So I'm going to go back again and now do a darker shade of gray. And work along those edges again very carefully. And this is something you can do. Paint is a liquid medium, but you can control it very precisely. Now, sometimes artists want to work in a less controlled way for expressive purposes and things like that. That's fine, but it should be always something that you can control, that you make an artistic choice to work in a looser, sort of less controlled way, and not because you don't know how to handle paint. So this is just like if you're going to be a writer or learn writing, you need to start by learning sentence structure, grammar, spelling, all these things. Or if you're learning a musical instrument, you start by learning scales. And this is equivalent to that. We want to learn how to handle this paint in a very precise and controlled way. So we would continue that value scale all the way to black, with each one getting a little bit darker. We want each one to be different, but not too big a jump between any of them. So a nice even march to black. And this is a pretty good example here of the gray, and very neat and well done.